Hi everybody, Sheriff Ron Hain here with the Employee Spotlight, and of course we have to spotlight this employer right here, Deputy Nicole Krupp. So I'm incredibly proud of Nicole and her career here at the Sheriff's Office. You actually did not start as a deputy, did you? How did you start?
So I started as an intern here. I worked in the jail for my master's degree internship, and then throughout the course of working in the jail, I then kind of proposed to Sheriff Hain a social work program. So through my course of doing my hours in the jail and then proposing the internship program, kind of made my way to a social worker.
And you started the social work program here. We did not have that here before, but you were the ground level, the groundbreaking level at the Kane County Sheriff's Office to implement a social work program. So don't say that so shyly. Be incredibly proud of that, that you started the foundation for it all. And now 2 years later, 2.5 years later, what does that program look like? Even though you're not involved with it anymore, we're going to get to what you're doing now. But what's it look like now?
Yeah, so the social work program has absolutely skyrocketed. When I first started, it was just me, and I took on the caseload all by myself. Throughout the first year, the caseload grew so tremendously that Sheriff Hain approved for a second social worker to come on board, which is when we hired Desi. Desi came on board, and then her and I were sharing the workload. Throughout my time as a social worker, I kind of always knew I wanted to transition to the road as a deputy so I could implement a lot of my social work skills on the road. And that's when I then, it's a long story, but when I then left and Desi kind of took over.
And literally thousands of cases is what they're managing now. And
yes.
We had no idea when you first started the program how much it would explode. And so when you came to me and said, hey Sheriff, get the caseload now, just after, I think it was 5 or 6 months, we had that 6-month review, and you said, hey, we got to do something different, we got to hire somebody else. And of course we were 100% behind that, and just look where we are now. So great services provided, all by your brain trust. So thank you for that. So you wanted to be a police officer, not necessarily at the Sheriff's Office originally, but I said, verbal contract, you're going to stay here and take our test, and we're going to hire you. So I was so proud when you did take that test and you were on the list and we were able to hire you as a deputy sheriff. And now tell me how that looks with all of that great background you have as a licensed social worker plugged into being a sworn police officer. What's that look like on a daily basis for you?
Yeah, so this is like the number one question I get asked. Everyone is always curious about my transition from a social worker to a deputy. I had always wanted to be the first to get to calls rather than being like the second or third responder and just the follow-up person.
Why is that?
Well, I mean, one, the excitement of it, but then two, I felt like I could have more of an impact if I met people firsthand rather than following up with them as the second, third, fourth follow-up person. Like
a social worker would? Right. You know, the call to the scene, a co-responder model? Okay.
Yes. So I was hoping to be able to respond first out to some of these more like traumatic events in hopes to make more of a significant impact immediately. Just because sometimes given the scenarios, we can't always send a social worker out if it's too dangerous or the environment doesn't allow for us to do so. So now that I am on the road as a deputy, my social work skills have come in handy more often than not. Constantly talking to people, de-escalating situations, counseling people on scene. I think people don't expect us to necessarily listen and have feedback and advice to give to them, but I often, have people reach back out to me for that support and advice when I was just called to their house for a domestic.
So I have a trick bag question for you that we did not rehearse. A lot of people, some people will say, well, hey, social workers should be the first one to respond. The whole defund the police idea. And I always say, well, wait a second, we have to diffuse a volatile situation. That's what uniformed, sworn, trained police officers are there to do. And then of course that co-responder model where the social worker comes in is a great position to be in. So how do you feel about that when people say, well, you should just be a social worker and you should go out to calls, being a sworn deputy? What's that mean to you?
Yeah, I've always stuck by this answer even prior to being a sworn deputy. I do not agree with sending a social worker on scene first, especially alone. I believe that our deputies, and not just our deputies, but any deputies for that matter, should address the scene first, make sure it's secure, kind of like what we do with EMS, make sure it's secure, and then send in a social worker. I think the co-response model is the best model that we could possibly use. I could only foresee tragic events happening from sending a social worker in by themselves.
I agree, and we saw that with DCFS, right?
Right,
When,
totally.
They were trying to investigate or mitigate circumstances, and then unfortunately there were fatalities of DCFS workers because they were not supported by law enforcement
Right.
at the scene. So what do you think the whole future of LSW, LCSW, and sworn police officers looks like? What's the future of law enforcement in this modern environment?
Yeah, so I believe that mental health needs to be more mobile, and what I mean by that is we need to bring services to people rather than people reaching out to us. It often seems like people put their name out there for services but don't necessarily have the resources for it. However, if we bring the resources to their doorstep, I think they're a lot more receptive and open to receiving services. So I could foresee the co-response model looking like a sworn deputy or detective along with a social worker. Our social workers have high qualifications, especially Desi, she's got her LCSW. So between a social worker and a deputy, I think we could do great work together on a scene.
Because mental health is such a huge component of everything we deal with now, almost everything we deal with. So I really appreciate that feedback, and that's the model that we're involving now, and that's where we're heading towards in modern law enforcement. So
Right.
Deputy Krupp, thank you so much for your time.
Sure.
Be safe out there in the street, okay?
Thanks. Yeah.
All right, take care.